Hello all. My name is Joe, a retired law enforcement officer. Let me tell you about one of the craziest nights I ever had on the job. This happened over 10 years ago on a freezing night in the city. The ground was covered in thick frost, and it looked like it was about to snow. Nights like that were usually pretty quiet. Most people, even criminals, didn't want to be out in that cold. Around 3 a.m., the dispatch controller got a call from a frantic man who could barely talk because he was so scared. When they asked what was wrong, he screamed that his sister was possessed and had tried to cut his heart out while he was sleeping. Yeah, you heard that right. Possessed. He said he managed to fight her off and run to the bathroom where he locked himself in. The dispatcher immediately sent us to his address and put us through to the guy so we could get a better idea of what was going on. Look, folks, I'm not one for nonsense, especially when it comes to hoax calls, so I got right to the point, trying to figure out what was happening. "There's a demon in my sister's body," the guy whispered on the phone, his voice so quiet it was like he was scared of being overheard. "I'm sorry, a what?" I asked, not sure I heard him right. "A demon. It's been battling me for days. It got free from the chains." As he said this, I could hear scratching and banging at the door in the background. What I heard next still gives me shivers. There was another voice, low and guttural, speaking some other language and taunting the guy. It sounded like it was rattling things in the bathroom, and I felt a deep sense of something to be worried about, even though I couldn't understand the words. We stayed on the line with the guy as we arrived and quickly broke down the door to the house. What we saw inside was something out of a nightmare. At the bathroom door was a young woman, thin and gaunt. When the brother said she had broken out of her chains, he wasn't kidding. There was a thick chain attached to a bloody handcuff on one of her wrists that clanked every time she moved. Her body was covered in awful, self-inflicted scratches, and one of her eyes had popped a blood vessel, making it look bright red. Her clothes were torn, and she was so pale she looked like a corpse. The bathroom door was dented and scratched like some kind of wild animal had attacked it, with deep gouges where her fingernails had dug in as she tried to get to her brother. When she saw us, she let out a horrifying scream and tried to attack. Even with 4 big, strong officers there, we had a real fight on our hands. She scratched and bit us ferociously, shrieking the whole time. It took everything we had, to subdue her and get her taken away to a psych ward where she apparently still is to this day. When we finally convinced the brother to come out of the bathroom, he showed us the damage she had done to him. His chest was a mass of scratches and blood, where his sister had tried to dig his heart out with her bare hands. Many of the officers involved in that incident found religion afterward. I'm not saying I did, but I can't blame them. So yeah, that's one night on the job I'll never forget. It was terrifying, and it made me question a lot of things, but that's the kind of stuff we deal with sometimes. You never know what's waiting for you on the other end of a call. Hey folks, it's Officer Mike here. I've seen my fair share of weird things on the force, but what happened in Santa Maria in the mid-'80s still gives me chills till today. Let me tell you about the night. The things got seriously strange. Seriously strange. It all started with reports of a tall man hanging around outside people's homes in the countryside. Some of these homes had been broken into recently, so folks were already on edge. One night, we got a call from a guy who was downright frantic. He was yelling about a 7-foot, gray-haired man outside his door trying to get in. Now, this guy had a bit of a reputation, for drinking, so we weren't sure what to make of it at first. But the dispatcher sent us out there anyway, just to be safe. While we were on our way, the dispatcher kept the guy on the line, trying to get more details. The guy was losing it, saying the gray man was watching him through the windows and wanted to hurt him. When asked to describe the man, all he could say was, "He's tall, thin, big head, and huge black eyes." The dispatcher told him to lock himself in a room until we got there. As she was giving him instructions, this loud buzzing noise started on the line, getting louder and louder until the guy screamed and the call cut off. She radioed us to expect violence at the scene. We pulled up to this old wooden 2-story house with peeling white paint and a dried-out yard. It looked like, oh my, something straight out of a horror movie. And there was no one outside and no sign of anyone lurking around. As we walked up to the house, we heard the caller screaming from inside. In my mind, I was like, what the? But I'm a law enforcement officer, so... This is the police. We're coming in, we shouted, but the door wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked, but it felt like something was holding it shut from the inside. Then, that buzzing noise started again, louder than ever, and the man's screams reached an ear-splitting level. We had no choice but to break the door down. It took a few tries, but we finally got it open and the noise stopped. What we saw inside was a nightmare. Blood was splashed on the floors and walls, and there were strange-looking bloody footprints everywhere. Guns drawn, we moved carefully through the house, checking every corner. On the upstairs, we heard a movement and muffled cries. We followed a blood trail, leading into a room. Inside, we found the homeowner, tied up and gagged, covered in cuts like he'd been attacked with a razor. His eyes were bulging with terror, and he was drenched in urine. Quickly, we untied him, and he broke down, sobbing and thanking us for saving him. He kept saying the gray man wanted to take him away. The cuts on his body were precise, almost like someone was trying to map out his organs. It was beyond creepy. We searched the house thoroughly, but found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. Just those strange footprints in the blood that didn't match anything we knew. The man claimed he had called the police 5 hours before we arrived, but our records showed we got there in about 30 minutes from our previous stop and found him within 10 minutes of arriving. Somehow, we lost over 4 hours from arrival to discovery. It didn't make any sense. A few years later, the man committed suicide. In his note, he said they wouldn't leave me alone and warned us, the officers who found him, that they were after us too. He also thanked us for rescuing him. Since then, sometimes on the darkest nights, I feel like I'm being watched. It's a feeling I can't shake, even after all these years. So there you have it, one of the strangest and most unsettling cases I've ever encountered. I still wonder about that night and the gray man. Was it all real, or just the ramblings of a terrified man? I guess we'll never know for sure. Hey, I'm Jake. Let me tell you about one of the creepiest nights on the job that made me go crazy whenever I think about it. This happened in the dead of night at this old office building in a rough part of town. The place had been converted into a bunch of offices with a pharmacy attached. We got a call about an alarm going off in one of the upstairs offices. The dispatcher told us we had to wait for a key holder to let us in. After a bit, this quiet middle-aged guy showed up. He looked tired, like he was ready to drop. We headed inside together. Now, this building was old and had no windows in the corridors, so we only had our flashlights to see, since the lights were on timers. We made our way down the main corridor, where all the offices branched off, and went to the stairs behind a door. That's when we found out the key holder didn't have a key for that door. Frustrated, we all went back to the elevator, leaving the key holder on the main floor. The elevator opened to a dark corridor with one overhead light fixture at the end, creating a pool of light. It felt weird, but nothing too bad yet. We started checking the doors, finding them all locked and secure. Most of the offices were for doctors and small businesses. When we got to the last office, the one under the light, we found it open. "Police! We're coming in," we called out, stepping inside. It was a big reception area with a dozen exam rooms. The air was much colder in here, but old buildings have weird temperature changes all the time. We cleared all the rooms, but they were empty. No furniture, nothing. We figured it was a faulty alarm and left the office. But as soon as we stepped out, we realized something was very wrong. The light above the office we just checked was out, and now a light was on at the elevators. My partner Mike looked pale, and his hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Weren't all those doors we just checked closed and locked?" Mike said, pointing with a trembling finger. "Yeah, so? Well, now they're all standing open." He was right. Every door we checked minutes ago was now open. No one passed us, and those doors were locked. We didn't hear a thing. Seriously, we didn't hear anything. We drew our guns and started rechecking the offices, moving from the elevator to the last office. Each room was empty, nothing moved except the doors. When we reached the end office again, it felt even colder than before. We were getting seriously freaked out. Then, as soon as we stepped back into the corridor, the door slammed shut behind us and our radios went nuts, with static and loud screeching. It sounded like voices yelling at us through the static. We bolted for the elevator and took it back down. When we got back downstairs, the key holder was nowhere to be found. I radioed dispatch to check in, but they said the key holder was still on his way and would be there in 5 minutes. I felt my hair stand on end. "We were just inside with a key holder?" I said. "Call in," the dispatcher replied, confused. I called, and she explained they had just reached the key holder, who was still en route. My heart pounded as we waited. When the real key holder, a woman, arrived, we asked her about the man who let us in. She frowned and said she didn't know any other key holders for the building. We described the guy, and her eyes widened. "That sounds like one of the doctors who used to lease an office on the second floor," she said. "He committed suicide at his home a few days ago. We've been getting weird alarms ever since." That was it. Mike and I noped out of there. We still refused to take calls at that building. Some things just aren't worth the risk.